The void beyond the rim had no stars. Commander Elias Rahman floated in the observation blister of the Terran Deep Range cruiser TFS as Salam, palms pressed to the cold glass, watching nothing happen. Behind him, the bridge lights were dimmed to blood red for night cycle, but no one slept. They hadn't truly slept in 73 days, not since the first transmission. Elias was 42 standard years old, beard flecked with premature silver, eyes the color of deep space black that had stared too long into the dark. His uniform, once crisp Terran navy blue, was frayed at the cuffs. He hadn't changed it since the rim crossing. No one had. Fabric was for the living. Out here, they were only borrowing time. Contact bearing 0 Mark 0. Lieutenant Arya Chen's voice was soft, almost reverent. Same vector as yesterday, stronger. Elias didn't turn. Play it. The speakers exhaled a sound that was not sound, a pressure behind the eyes, a chord struck on strings made of dying stars. Then the words came, ancient, perfect, inevitable, children of dust. You have trespassed the threshold of eternity. Kneel and be forgiven. Every human on the bridge flinched as though slapped. Someone whispered a prayer in Arabic, another in Spanish. A third just swore long and low in Mandarin. Elias felt it crawl across his skin like frost. He closed his eyes. Remembered his daughter's laugh on the last hollow call before launch. Remembered the way his wife had pressed her forehead to his and said, "Come back, Habibi. God didn't make you to die out here alone." He opened his eyes. "Record response," he said, voice steady as bedrock. The comm officer's hands shook, but she nodded. Elias leaned toward the pickup. "This is Commander Elias Rahman, Terran Fleet, as Salam. We received your message. We do not kneel to demands delivered by ghosts. If you want to talk, give us coordinates. We'll come to you." Silence. Then the chord again, deeper this time, almost amused. "Coordinates follow. Come unarmed, come alone, or do not come at all." The numbers burned themselves across every screen like white fire. Elias stared at them. His heart hammered once hard, then settled. "Helm," he said quietly. "Set course." Lieutenant Chen spun in her chair. "Sir, that vector is inside the rim anomaly. Nothing comes back from." "I heard the order, Lieutenant. Set the course." She searched his face, saw something there that made her swallow whatever protest she had left. "Aye, sir." Behind Elias, Dr. Mateo Ruiz, ship's xenotheologian old friend and the only man aboard who still wore a cassock under his uniform, stepped close. "You sure about this, Eli?" Mateo's voice was barely a breath. "These things, they're what the old myths called the Elohim, the Watchers. The ones who left when we started writing our own names on the walls of the universe." Elias gave a tired half smile. "Then it's time we introduced ourselves properly." Mateo studied him for a long moment, then reached into his pocket and pressed something small and wooden into Elias' hand. A rosary, olive wood from Jerusalem, worn smooth by generations. "In case you need to remember whose side you're on," Mateo said. Elias closed his fingers around it. "I never forgot." Alarms began to wail, proximity warnings. The stars ahead were wrong, twisting, folding. The rim anomaly wasn't a place. It was a wound in space-time, a scar left when the universe was young, and so were the things that called themselves gods. "All hands," Elias said into ship-wide. "Brace for translation. And someone wake the civilians. They'll want to see this." He felt the deck shudder as the Salam and her 2 escort corvettes, the TFS Dakar and TFS Valiant, engaged their Alcubierre rings. Reality stretched like taffy. Elias' stomach flipped. For one terrifying second, he saw the raw stuff of creation, threads of light, impossible geometries, something vast and gold-eyed watching from the spaces between heartbeats. Then they were through, and everything was quiet. The fleet drifted in a sphere of perfect black. No stars, no cosmic background glow. Only 3 human ships, small and brave and impossibly alone, hanging in a darkness that had weight. Chen's voice cracked. Sensors are blind, sir. It's like space forgot how to exist here." Elias stared out the blister. In the distance, though distance had no meaning here, something moved. Vast, luminous. Serpentine forms woven from galaxies, wings of nebulae unfurling like judgment. The gods had come to meet them, one detached from the host. It was larger than Jupiter, beautiful the way a supernova is beautiful, terrifying and perfect and ancient beyond comprehension. Light poured from it in waves that sang in frequencies that made teeth ache and souls ring like bells. Its voice filled every mind at once. "You have come. Now kneel." Elias felt his knees buckle, not from gravity, there was none, but from the sheer pressure of being seen by something that had watched the first hydrogen atoms learn to hold hands. Every crew member on every ship dropped. Some wept, some screamed, some simply folded like paper, but Elias stayed standing. He didn't know how. His legs shook, blood roared in his ears. The rosary cut into his palm. He took one step forward, then another, until he stood at the very edge of the blister, nose almost touching the glass, staring up at a being that could unmake him with a thought. "No," he said. The single word hung in the silence like a gunshot. The entity tilted. There was no other word for it, a continent-sized head made of starfire and wrath. "You defy US." Elias laughed. It came out raw, half-sob, half-battle cry. "We've been defying bigger things than you since we crawled out of the mud," he said. "Gravity, entropy, ourselves. You want worship, earn it." For a moment that stretched into eternity, nothing moved. Then the entity spoke again, and this time there was something new in its voice, curiosity, maybe even fear, UARE. Unexpected, Elias felt the pressure ease, just a fraction, enough to breathe. He lifted the rosary, let it dangle between them like an offering and a challenge. "We're human," he said simply. "Get used to disappointment." Far away in the heart of the divine host, something vast stirred, something older than the others, something that had not spoken in 12 billion years. It turned its attention toward the tiny fleet and smiled. Somewhere on the Valiant, a young ensign who had never believed in anything looked at the impossible beings surrounding them, felt the ship tremble under the weight of their regard, and whispered without thinking, "Please, God, don't let us die stupid." The darkness listened. And in the silence between one heartbeat and the next, Elias Rahman felt something brush his mind, not the crushing weight of the false gods, but something gentler, vast but not cruel, ancient but not indifferent. A voice that was not a voice, saying only, "Courage, son of Adam, I never left." The entity before him recoiled as though burned. Elias grinned, fierce and sudden and utterly human. "Still waiting on that conversation," he said. "You coming aboard, or do we do this here?" The darkness rippled, and the gods prepared to answer. The gods stepped onto the deck of the As-Salam, and the ship screamed, not metaphorically. The hull plating shrieked like a living thing as reality itself bent under the visitor's footfall. Lights strobed crimson. Gravity fluctuated, sending unsecured mugs and rifles and people sliding across the deck in slow, dreamlike waves. Somewhere aft, a bulkhead buckled with a sound like a dying whale. Elias stood in the main hangar, boots magnet locked, pulse hammering so hard he tasted iron. He had ordered the bay cleared except for himself and 4 volunteers. They formed a loose semicircle behind him now, rifles lowered but fingers white on the grips. The entity filled the space without filling it. It was simultaneously 10 meters tall and the size of a man, wings of white fire folded tight against a form that kept slipping out of human perception, like trying to look directly at the sun. Where its feet touched the deck, frost bloomed in fractal spirals. The air smelled of ozone and myrrh. Elias' ears popped. His teeth ached. Every instinct screamed run, kneel, hide, die, anything but stand here. He stood. The being regarded him with eyes that were not eyes, pools of liquid starlight, galaxies wheeling inside them. When it spoke, the words arrived inside Elias' skull, bypassing ears entirely. "You are the voice." "I am Commander Elias Rahman," he answered aloud, because humans speak with their mouths even when it's pointless. "Welcome aboard the Terran fleet ship As-Salam. Peace be upon you." A voice that was not a voice, saying only. The entity tilted its head. The gesture felt curious. "Peace is a human word. We have not known peace since before your sun learned to burn." Elias felt the 4 volunteers behind him shift. He didn't look back. Couldn't. If he broke eye contact, he would fall, and if he fell, they all would. "Then maybe it's time you learned," he said. A ripple passed through the being, like wind over wheat made of light. Laughter maybe, or grief. "You are not afraid." It wasn't a question. "I'm terrified," Elias said. The honesty surprised even him. But fear isn't the opposite of courage. Giving in is. Behind him, Ensign Park, 19 years old, freckles, still had baby fat on his cheeks, made a small choked sound. Elias heard the kid's rifle clatter to the deck. Then Park stepped forward unarmed and stood at Elias' shoulder. The god's attention shifted. Park straightened, trembling, but didn't retreat. "We remember your kind," the entity said. "Once we walked your world when it was still hot and new. You were small, hairless. You hid in CAVES and painted stars on stone because you could not yet reach them." Its gaze swept the hangar, lingering on the Terran insignia painted on the wall, a crescent embracing an olive branch. "You still paint stars," it observed, "but now you bring them with you." Elias felt the moment tilt, like a ship finding its balance after a storm. The crushing pressure eased another fraction. The frost on the deck began to melt. "We didn't come to fight," he said. "We came to talk. You called us children of dust. Fine, dust got curious. Dust built ships. Dust crossed the rim looking for its parents and found the house empty." The wings flared, casting light that had no shadow. "The house was never empty. We were waiting to see what you would become." Elias' mouth went dry. "And, a pause that lasted 1,000 years, you became troublesome." This time the laughter was unmistakable, vast and warm and ancient. The temperature in the bay rose 10 degrees. Someone behind Elias exhaled a sob of relief. The entity shrank, folding in on itself until it stood no taller than a man, robed in light that slowly dimmed to something almost human. Features resolved, sharp, androgynous, skin like polished obsidian shot through with gold. Eyes still galaxies, but now Elias could meet them without bleeding from the nose. "I am called Zuriel," it said, and the name arrived with the weight of collapsing stars. "In the tongues of your infancy." Elias swallowed. "I'm Elias, these are my people." Zuriel's gaze moved across the 4 volunteers, lingered on Park, who was crying silently but still standing. "You bring children to face US. He volunteered, Elias said. "We don't force anyone, that's kind of the point." Zuriel seemed to consider this. Then slowly, deliberately, it knelt, not in worship, in respect. The volunteers gasped. Elias felt his knees try to buckle again, but this time from sheer disbelief. We do not kneel to dust, Zuriel said softly. But perhaps dust has grown tall. Elias found his voice. Then stand up, talk to us like equals or don't talk at all. Zuriel rose. The wings were gone now, only a faint shimmer at the shoulders. Your fleet is small, 3 ships, against the host that birthed galaxies. We noticed, Elias said dryly. Yet you came. We were invited. You were WRNED, Elias shrugged. Humans have a long history of ignoring warnings being foreplay. Zuriel stared, then impossibly it smiled. The expression looked painful, like a muscle long unused. You are not what we expected. Good, Elias said. Expectations are how empires die. Alarms blared again, different this time. Red strobes, combat stations. Chen's voice over the intercom, tight with fear. Commander, multiple signatures, divine host is closing formation. Charging something. Looks like a lance. Elias' blood turned to ice. Zuriel's face hardened. It turned toward the hangar doors as if it could see through steel and vacuum. And why kin, it said, voice suddenly tired. They fear what they cannot control. Elias stepped forward. Then help us stop them. Zuriel looked at him for a long moment. You would trust me. I'm trusting you right now, Elias said. Standing here unarmed while your family aims a planet killer at my people. Ball S in your court. Zuriel closed its eyes. When it opened them again, the galaxies inside were spinning faster. Then let us teach them fear of a different kind. It raised one hand. Light poured from its palm, not destructive but protective. A shimmering dome snapped into existence around the 3 Terran ships just as the lance fired. The impact was soundless. The shield flared white, then gold, then held. On the bridge, every screen went blinding bright. Someone screamed. Someone else started reciting the Shahada under their breath. Inside the hangar, Elias staggered but stayed upright. Zuriel did not move at all. The light faded. The Terran fleet was untouched. Zuriel lowered its hand. They will not stop, it said quietly. Not until they understand. Elias stared at the being that had just saved them. His voice came out rough. Why? Zuriel met his eyes. Because I remembered. A memory brushed Elias' mind, gentle but overwhelming. Earth 4 billion years ago. Oceans still steaming. A figure of light walking the shorelines, watching the first amino acids learn to replicate. Whispering almost shyly, let there be. Then later, much later, another memory. The same figure standing on a hill outside Jerusalem, watching a carpenter carry a cross, tears of light falling upward into the sky. Elias staggered. Zuriel caught his elbow with a hand that felt like warm marble and starfire both. I was there when your story began, Commander. I will not be the one to end IT. From the corridor outside, boots pounded. Mateo Ruiz burst into the hangar, cassock flapping, face pale. Eli, what the hell is? He saw Zuriel and dropped to his knees, not in submission but awe. Zuriel looked at the priest, then back at Elias. Your God is subtler than we ever were, it said, almost amused. And far more patient. Elias found his voice. Then let's go talk to your family, together. Zuriel inclined its head, together. As they turned toward the bridge, Elias glanced at the rosary still clenched in his fist. One bead had cracked clean in half. He smiled despite everything. Somewhere in the dark between ships, something ancient and vast began to weep without sound. And on the main view screen, the divine host parted just slightly, like curtains before a stage. Waiting to see what the children of dust would do next. The throne room of the gods was not a room at all, but the corpse of a universe, and Elias walked its rotting heart unafraid. They stepped through a wound in space that Zuriel tore open with one hand, and the 3 Terran ships followed like ducklings behind a swan made of light. No jump drives, no inertia. One moment they hung in the rim darkness, the next they drifted inside something that had once been reality once and now was only memory. The sky was a dying red giant, swollen and cracked, leaking plasma like blood from a split artery. Around it orbited the husks of 1 trillion planets, some shattered into rings, others frozen mid-explosion, their continents still glowing from whatever cataclysm had ended them. Black holes drifted like carrion birds, sipping at the edges of time. Between everything hung threads of silver fire, dead laws of physics unraveling. And at the center, on a throne carved from the core of a neutron star, sat the first. It had no shape Elias could hold in his mind. Every time he looked, the silhouette changed, sometimes a towering figure of white flame, sometimes a woman with 1,000 weeping eyes, sometimes only a child curled around a broken toy galaxy. But the presence was constant, crushing, absolute, older than regret. Around the throne knelt the host. Thousands of them, tens of thousands, wings folded, heads bowed. The silence was so complete Elias could hear his own pulse. Zuriel stopped 10 meters from the dais. Elias kept walking until he stood directly beneath the throne, boots planted on a fragment of world that still had oceans frozen mid-wave. The first spoke, and every atom in Elias' body tried to lie down and die. Who dares? Elias tasted blood. His vision tunneled. Somewhere behind him he heard Park retching, heard Chen whispering the Lord's Prayer in Cantonese, heard Mateo's calm Latin holding the line between sanity and oblivion. He lifted his chin. Commander Elias Rahman, Terran Fleet, representative of 8 billion children of dust who refused to kneel to bullies. A ripple passed through the host. Wings rustled like a storm of swords. The first leaned forward. The neutron star throne groaned. "You are an insect." "Funny," Elias said, voice raw but steady. "Your messenger seemed to think we'd grown tall." Zuriel stepped to Elias' side. The other entities hissed, actual hissing like serpents made of lightning. "Brother Zuriel has fallen," one snarled. "He brings vermin into the sanctum." Zuriel's answer was quiet. "I bring the future." The first raised one hand. The gesture was lazy, almost bored. A lance of pure entropy speared toward Elias. No light, no heat, only the promise of never having existed at all. Zuriel moved faster than thought, intercepting the lance with his body. Light and unlight collided. For 1 impossible seconds the corpse universe held its breath. Zuriel was flung backward, smoking, wings charred to bone. He hit the ground hard enough to crater the fragment they stood on. Elias didn't think. He ran to Zuriel, dropped to his knees, pressed both hands to the ruined chest. The flesh, if it was flesh, was cooling already. "Stay with me," Elias said fiercely. "You do not get to die for us and then quit." Zuriel's galaxy eyes flickered, a broken laugh. "I have never been spoken to like that." "Good, get used to it." Behind them the first rose. The throne disintegrated into ash just from the motion. Enough GAMES. The host rose with it, wings spreading until the dead universe vanished beneath a tide of fire and eyes. The pressure redoubled. Elias felt his bones creak. He stood anyway, stepping between Zuriel and the host, arms spread like that could possibly matter. "You want to erase us," he shouted into the storm. "Fine, but you'll have to look every single one of us in the eye while you do it. 8 billion faces, 8 billion stories. You ready for that?" Silence. Then anew voices, human voices, poured from the open comm channels of all three ships. First came the children aboard the Dakar, singing an old Swahili lullaby their parents had taught them to keep the dark away. Then the engineers on Valiant, reciting the periodic table like a battle hymn. Then every soul across the fleet, prayers and curses and love letters to people they would never see again, rising together in one ragged, defiant chorus. The host faltered. The first form flickered, uncertain for the first time in 13 billion years. Elias felt it, the shift, like a tide turn. He took one step forward. "You're not gods," he said, quiet enough that the entire dead universe leaned in to hear. "You're just the last kids on the playground who never learned to share." A single laugh cracked through the silence, Zuriel dragging himself upright, blood of light pouring from his mouth. "He is not wrong, Elder." The first stared at Elias, really stared, and for the first time Elias saw fear in those ever-changing eyes. "You would replace US." "No," Elias said, "we would succeed you." "There's a difference." He reached into his pocket, pulled out the cracked rosary and held it up. The olive wood beads caught the dying red light and glowed like embers. "We don't want your throne. We want to build our own tables. Invite whoever wants to sit, even you if you can learn manners." The host stirred, restless. Some looked to the first. Others looked to Zuriel. A few, very few, looked to Elias with something that might have been hope. The first sat back down on nothing and everything. The motion felt tired. "We built the rules of existence," it said. "We wrote the first equations on the skin of the void. And then you stopped," Elias answered. "You one got bored, left the game running on autopilot while you argued about who got to be in charge. Meanwhile, the board kept growing pieces you never imagined." He gestured at the 3 tiny ships floating in the distance, lights still blinking defiantly. "Those are ours." Another silence, longer this time. Then the first did something no one expected. It bowed its head, not in submission, in acknowledgement. "The cycle turns," it whispered, and the words tasted like grief and relief both. "We held the seat too long." One by one the host followed, wings folding, heads lowering, not to Elias, to something beyond him, something vast and quiet and patient that had been watching since the first photon learned to run. Elias felt it again, that brush against his mind. Gentler this time, proud. Zuriel placed a hand on Elias' shoulder. The touch no longer burned. "They yield," he said softly. "Not to you, to what comes after." Elias looked around at the kneeling host, at the corpse universe beginning to bloom with new light at the edges, at his 3 battered ships still flying. He felt suddenly unbearably small and impossibly tall. "What happens now?" he asked. Zuriel smiled, and this time it didn't look painful at all. "Now," he said, "we teach them how to stand up again. And you teach us how to sit at the table." Far away, on the As-Salam's bridge, Lieutenant Chen wiped tears from her cheeks and whispered into the open channel, "Guys, I think we just won the universe." The dead stars began to shine again, and somewhere in the newborn light, a single olive tree took root on a fragment of shattered world, leaves unfurling toward a sky that suddenly remembered how to be blue. When the first stood a second time, the universe held its breath, and Elias realized the real war hadn't started yet. The kneeling host rose slowly, like a tide reversing. Wings of fire and night unfurled until the reborn starlight dimmed beneath them. The air, if air was still a word here, crackled with something colder than wrath. It was the sound of pride remembering it had teeth. The first form solidified into something almost human, tall, regal, sexless, robed in collapsing galaxies. Face was beautiful the way a guillotine is beautiful, perfect, and inevitable. When it spoke, every heart in the Terran fleet skipped the same beat. We yield the seat, it said, voice soft as graves opening, but not the table. Elias felt the shift like ice water down his spine. Zuriel's hand tightened on his shoulder, warning and apology at once. The first extended one hand. Between its fingers materialized a sphere the size of a moon, blacker than the void, drinking every photon that touched it. Inside the sphere, Elias saw glimpses. Earth burning, Luna cracked in half, children screaming soundlessly as gravity forgot their names. A single word formed in every human mind, gentle as a lullaby and twice as lethal. Choose. Zuriel stepped forward, voice raw. Elder, this is not the accord. The accord was written when your kind were still learning to count stars, the first replied. The successor must prove worth, not merely defy. Elias stared at the sphere. He didn't need to ask what it was. A kill switch, one thought from the first, and humanity would be unmade, not destroyed, unmade, erased from having ever existed. No fossils gone, memories gone, even the idea of a species that walked upright and looked at the dark and said, mine. He felt 8 billion lives balanced on the tip of his tongue. Zuriel whispered, they are afraid, Elias, afraid of becoming myth. They will burn everything rather than fade. Elias looked at the host, saw it now, really saw it, not gods. Just the last survivors of an earlier draft of creation, clinging to relevance the only way immortals know how, by making sure nothing else ever gets to be immortal too. He laughed. It started small, just a cracked sound in his throat, then rolled out of him until he was bent over, hands on knees, laughing like a madman in the face of extinction. The first's eyes narrowed. You find oblivion amusing. No, Elias wheezed, straightening. Tears streaked his face, but they were from laughter, not fear. I find you hilarious, you're scared of us. After 13 billion years, the architects of reality are throwing a tantrum because the ants learned to write poetry. He stepped closer. The sphere's gravity tugged at his uniform, trying to drag him in. You want proof we're worthy, he asked. Fine, but we do it our way. He turned his back on the first, deliberate insult and ultimate trust, and walked to the edge of the fragment they stood on. Below, the 3 Terran ships floated, tiny and bright and alive. Elias keyed his suit comm so every soul in the fleet could hear. This is Rahman, you all saw what just happened. They offered us the throne. We told them we'd rather build a bigger table. Now they're scared we might actually do it. He paused, let them hear his smile. So here's the deal. In about 30 seconds they're going to give us a test, one chance to prove we deserve to exist. I need every department to give me the most insane human thing you can think of in the next 20 seconds. No filters. Go. Static. Then chaos. Engineering. We can overclock the Alcubierre rings into a standing wave that sings. Medical. We've got 17 embryos in cryo. We could wake one right now, let it hear its first lullaby in front of gods. Hydroponics. The olive tree we brought from Earth just bloomed. Out of season. First flowers in deep space, sir. T-coms, there's a kid on the Dakar who brought her violin. She's 9, wants to know if she can play for them. Tears burned Elias' eyes. He turned back to the first. You want to see what succession looks like? He asked. Watch, the violin began. A single clear note, thin and reedy across the void, carried by every external speaker on all 3 ships. A child's rendition of an old Lebanese song Elias' mother used to hum while kneading bread. The notes were shaky at first, then steadier, braver. She was playing for an audience of cosmic horrors, and she refused to rush. Then the Alcubierre rings ignited, not for travel, but for music. The engineers tuned the warp fields like strings, layering impossible harmonics over the violin until the dead universe vibrated like a cathedral bell. Hydroponics flooded the external cams with the image of that impossible olive blossom, opening in real time, white petals catching starlight that hadn't existed 5 minutes ago. And in the medical bay of the As-Salam, Dr. Okonkwo held a waking newborn to the observation window, tiny fist waving at the host as if saying hello. The first watched. The sphere in its hand trembled. The violin reached the final phrase, sweet and aching and utterly human. The warp song held the last note until it fractured into 1,000 silver birds that flew through the corpse universe and nested in the cracks of dying stars. Silence. Then the first closed its fist. The sphere shattered, not with violence but with sorrow. Black fragments became white ash that drifted upward and became new stars. You weave life from death, it said, and its voice cracked for the first time in eternity. We only knew how to weave death from life. It looked at Elias, really looked, and saw something that made it flinch. We were wrong. One by one, the host lowered their wings entirely, not in defeat, in surrender to something larger than themselves. The first stepped down from where a throne had been, walked until it stood face to face with Elias. Up close, it smelled like petrichor in old libraries. Take the table, child of dust, it whispered. Make it bigger than we ever dreamed. It placed one hand over Elias' heart. The touch was feather light and galaxy heavy. And forgive us. Then it knelt, not to Elias, to the child still playing the final trembling note on a cheap violin 3 kilometers away, to the newborn waving at wonders, to the olive blossom that refused to wait for soil. The entire host followed, a wave of light and shadow crashing to their knees in the dust of a dead cosmos, while new stars kindled overhead like candles lit for children who had not yet learned to fear the dark. Elias stood in the middle of it all, chest heaving, tears cutting clean tracks through the grime on his face. Zuriel came to stand beside him, whole again, wings restored and brighter than before. They will serve now, he said quietly, not as masters, as uncles and aunts who finally grew up. Elias laughed again, softer this time. Humanity just adopted the pantheon. My daughter is never going to believe this. In the distance, the violin finally stopped. A small voice came over the open channel, shy and wondering. Did they like it? Elias lifted the mic. They loved it, sweetheart. You just saved the universe with a love song. A pause, then a delighted giggle that echoed across all bands, human and divine alike. And somewhere deeper than physics, something vast and quiet and endlessly patient brushed Elias' mind one last time. Well done, good and faithful servant. Now teach them how to dance. The corpse universe exhaled and became a cradle. But on the edge of the newborn cosmos, something older than even the first stirred in the dark and whispered a single word. Mine. The word was not sound. It was the memory of sound, the idea that sound had ever existed. It moved through the newly lit stars like a shiver through a sleeping child's spine. Every entity of the host flinched at once. Zuriel's wings snapped tight against his back. The first's head jerked up, eyes wide with something no immortal should ever feel, terror. Elias felt it crawl across his skin like cold fingers. The olive tree blooming on the shattered fragment withered in the space of one heartbeat, petals blackening and falling upward into nothing. What was that? He asked. The first's voice came out cracked and small, the outer dark, the one we locked outside the first word. Zuriel turned, searching the edges of the reborn cosmos where light thinned into something that hurt to perceive. We thought the seals would hold forever. We thought succession would happen inside the garden, not. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. The darkness at the edge thickened. It had no shape, yet it watched. It had no mouth, yet it spoke again, and this time every human heard it in the language their nightmares were written in. I waited. You opened the door. Now I come to claim what was promised. Stars began to go out. Not explode, not die, simply cease, as though someone were erasing them with a careful thumb. One by one, entire galactic arms vanished into perfect, featureless black. On the As-Salam, every screen filled with static that looked like teeth. The newborn in medical began to cry, a thin, heartbroken sound that carried across all channels. Elias felt his knees try to fold. Not from divine pressure this time, from the sudden animal certainty that humanity had exactly 1 minute left to exist. The first stepped forward, hands raised, voice shaking with authority it no longer fully owned. You were banished before the light was spoken. The compact was between US and the one who spoke IT, the darkness answered, amused. He is silent now. You are not HIM. More stars vanished. 1 billion suns gone between one breath and the next. Zuriel looked at Elias, and for the first time the ancient being looked lost. We cannot fight this, he whispered. We sealed it once by sacrificing half our number and breaking the first universe to make the walls. Even together we are only echoes. Elias stared at the spreading black. He thought of his daughter's laugh, of the violin still echoing in the calms, of the olive petals drifting upward like snow in reverse. He felt something rise in his chest, hot and furious and ancient as the first fire. Echoes can still sing, he said. He keyed fleet-wide. All hands, this is Rahman. I need every speaker, every emitter, every warp ring, every soul who can carry a tune. We're going to do the most human thing we've ever done. Chen's voice, trembling but steady. Which is, sir? We're going to say hello to the way only we've always said hello to the dark. He turned to the first. You said there was a compact, made with someone who isn't talking right now. Fine, then we'll talk for him. The first stared as if Elias had lost his mind. Elias grinned, fierce and tired and utterly unafraid. Get your choir in position, old man. Humanity's about to remind the void why it should be afraid of the light. Within 30 seconds, the 3 Terran ships had formed a perfect triangle around the withered olive tree fragment. Every external light flared to maximum. Alcubierre rings spun up again, this time not for music but for raw, defiant brightness. Every human voice in the fleet, 8,412 souls, began to speak at once. Not prayers, not yet. First came names. Every single person said their own name, loud and clear into the dark. Mothers, fathers, children, atheists, believers, sinners, saints, every name a spark thrown against the coming night. Elias Jamal Rahman, Arya Chen, Miguel Mateo Ruiz, Fatima Okonkwo, Aisha Rahman, age 7, Tara loves dinosaurs. Names poured out like water from a broken dam, overlapping, rising, refusing to be silent. The darkness paused, then the prayers began, not the polite kind. The raw, desperate, furious kind humans have screamed at the sky since the first thunder rolled, some in Arabic, some in Hebrew, some in languages that had died on Earth and been resurrected by stubborn grandparents who refused to let their grandchildren forget. Someone started the adhan, the call to prayer, and 10,000 miles away a rabbi picked up the Shema, and somewhere a little girl in the Dakar's nursery just sang Jesus Loves Me at the top of her lungs because that was the only song she knew. The voices braided together, not perfect, not synchronized, glorious in their chaos, and the darkness recoiled. The first's mouth actually fell open. Elias stepped to the very edge of the fragment, arms wide, tears streaming. You want what was promised. He shouted into the black. Here it is. 8 billion stubborn, messy, impossible children who looked at the dark and decided to bring our own damn light. You can't have us. We're already spoken for. The darkness hissed, a sound like every grave opening at once. Elias felt the presence again, the quiet, vast, patient, the one who had never left, only waited. This time the touch was not gentle. It was the grip of a father lifting his child out of deep water. A single word formed in Elias' mind, not in any language, yet perfectly clear. Sing. So they sang. Every warp rings became organ pipes. The ship's hulls resonated like cathedral bells. The olive tree, dead moments ago, burst into impossible flame, not burning, illuminating, a bush that refused to be consumed. The host, ancient and terrified and awed, added their voices for the first time in 13 billion years, not commands, but harmony. The newborn in medical stopped crying and laughed instead, a sound like breaking dawn, and the darkness screamed. It screamed the way the void screams when light remembers it was spoken into being by a word that still lives in human throats. The black began to retreat, peeling back like burned paper, revealing not new stars but the original light, older than creation, warmer than mercy. The outer dark shrank, wounded, diminished, until it was only a shadow fleeing toward the edges where even the new cosmos feared to look. Silence fell, soft as snowfall. Then a single olive leaf, green and perfect, drifted down and landed on Elias' outstretched palm. He looked at it, looked at the host standing tall again, eyes bright with something that might have been rebirth, looked at his 3 tiny ships, still shining. He laughed, the sound cracked and wet and joyous. On the all-fleet channel, the little girl with the violin came back on, voice small but fierce. Did we win again, Commander? Elias wiped his face. Yeah, Habibti, we won so hard the dark's gonna need therapy. The first walked forward slowly, as if approaching something holy. It knelt, this time without reservation, forehead touching the fragment where the burning bush still blazed without consuming. We thought we were the highest song, it whispered. We were only the overture. Elias offered a hand. After a moment, the first took it. Together they stood in the light that had never actually left, only waited for someone brave enough to sing it back into the open. Far away, in a small house on Terra, a 7-year-old girl woke from a dream of stars and told her mother, Daddy just turned the dark into music. And somewhere deeper than deep, the quiet voice smiled. 3 days later, the gods asked to come home with us. They said it quietly, almost shyly, as if the words tasted strange after billions of years of giving commands instead of making requests. The first stood at the foot of the As-Salam's main ramp, no longer wearing galaxies for robes. It had chosen something closer to human shape, tall, silver-haired, eyes the color of deep twilight before stars are born. The others waited behind it in a loose semicircle, Zuriel, Seraphil, Ramil, a dozen more, wings folded tight, looking for all the cosmos like teenagers waiting to be told whether they were allowed inside after breaking every window in the neighborhood. Elias leaned against the ramp railing, arms crossed, pretending his heart wasn't trying to climb out of his throat. You want to come to Terra, he said slowly. All of you, the first inclined its head. Not all, many will stay to tend the new cosmos. But some are tired of being monuments. We would like to remember what it feels like to be guests. Behind Elias, the entire crew had gathered on the flight deck in dress uniforms that had been hastily pressed. Children peeked between legs. Someone had hung a hand-painted banner that read Welcome, Uncle Zuriel in glitter and Arabic calligraphy. The 9-year-old violinist stood front and center, clutching her instrument like a shield. Elias rubbed the back of his neck. You understand Terra is messy. We argue about parking spaces. We have reality television. Our oceans are full of plastic and our politics are worse. Zuriel smiled, soft and sad and hopeful. We have watched your species invent forgiveness 70 times a day. We would very much like to learn how. Mateo Ruiz stepped forward, cassock spotless for once, eyes shining with tears he refused to let fall. There's an old monastery in the Sahara, he said, abandoned since the water wars. Brothers left the doors open in case wanderers ever needed shelter. It is room. The first looked at him as if Mateo had offered the keys to paradise. We would be honored, it whispered. Elias exhaled a laugh that was half sob. Fine, but there are rules. He held up one finger. Rule 1, no mind reading without permission. Humans get cranky about privacy. Second finger. Rule 2, you eat what we eat. No turning water into whatever you people drink. Replicators are for emergencies. Third finger. Rule 3, you get names, real ones. None of this, I who was before the first turning nonsense. My daughter will not be calling you great uncle ineffable. A ripple of laughter passed through the host, bright and startled, like they'd forgotten they knew how. The first bowed, deep and formal. Then I shall be Adam. Elias blinked. Seriously, it seems fitting, Adam said, a smile touching the corner of its mouth. The first of the second chance. Zuriel stepped forward next. I have chosen mine already. He looked straight at the little violinist. If the child permits, the girl's eyes went wide. You want my name? I would borrow it with gratitude, Zuriel said gently. Aisha. The girl Aisha looked at Elias. He nodded, throat thick. She walked up to the towering being of light, craned her neck, and said, "Only if you let me teach you how to play." Zuriel knelt so they were eye to eye. "It would be my greatest honor." Elias watched an archangel of the first creation accept a battered student model violin from a 9-year-old girl who had just saved existence with a love songs, and felt something inside his chest crack open in the best possible way. The loading ramp became a bridge. One by one the former gods walked it, some weeping openly, some laughing like children who had just discovered gravity could be gentle. They touched the metal with reverent fingers, as if the ship itself were holy ground. Inside the hangar, someone had set up folding tables. Real food not replicated, flatbread still steaming, hummus thick with olive oil, dates sticky with syrup, tea strong enough to wake the dead. The smell hit the host like a physical blow. Several actually staggered. Elias found Elias near the tea station, eyes wet. "They can taste," she whispered. "After all this time, they can taste." Elias poured a cup with shaking hands and offered it to Adam. The former ruler of reality accepted it like it was the Grail, took a sip, closed his eyes. A single tear slid down a cheek made of starlight. "It is bitter," Adam said, voice trembling, "and sweet and warm. How do you bear it?" "Practice," Elias said. "Lots and lots of practice." Hours blurred. The hangar became a feast, a festival, a family reunion no one had known they were invited to. A former god of wrath learned to lose at cards and laughed until he cried. A seraph with 6 wings and no concept of rhythm tried to dance dabk and failed spectacularly, while Palestinian grandmothers cheered him on anyway. Children climbed Zuriel like a jungle gym while he sat perfectly still, terrified of hurting them, until Aisha ordered him to relax and he obeyed like a soldier receiving salvation. Elias stood on a crate at one point and raised his voice. "Attention, one more rule." Silence fell. He pointed at the host. "You are guests. That means when my mother-in-law starts telling you how to fix the universe, you smile and nod. Resistance is futile." Roars of laughter, human and divine alike. Later, much later, Elias found Adam alone on the observation deck, staring at the stars that were no longer his to command. "Regretting it?" Elias asked quietly. Adam shook his head, wondering how we ever thought ruling was better than this. He gestured at the window, where beyond the glass the rest of the host were helping human engineers retrofit an old shuttle into something that could carry immortal passengers in comfort, arguing good-naturedly about seatbelts. "We spent eternity being feared," Adam said. "Tonight a child braided flowers into my hair and called me Uncle Adam. I have never been more powerful." Elias leaned beside him, shoulder to shoulder with a being that once held galaxies in its fist. "My daughter's gonna want to know if you like dinosaurs," he said. Adam smiled, soft and ancient and brand new. "I am particularly fond of the ones with feathers." They stood in silence for a while, watching the stars that now belonged to everyone. Eventually Adam spoke again, almost too soft to hear. "Thank you for not kneeling." Elias bumped his shoulder. "Thank you for learning how to stand up straight." Far below in the rebuilt hydroponics bay, the olive tree that had burned without being consumed put out its first new leaf since the darkness came. And somewhere in a small bedroom on Terra, a 7-year-old girl woke laughing from a dream of angels learning to dance, and ran to her window because she could have sworn she heard her father's voice on the wind saying, "We're bringing company home, Habibti. Set extra places at the table." She looked up at the stars, waved, and went to find more chairs. The first night the gods spent on Earth, they wept at the sound of rain. They had been given the old monastery in the Sahara, stone walls bleached bone white by centuries of sun, courtyards open to the stars, cisterns still sweet with water no one had expected to last. 12 of them came down in a single shuttle: Adam, Zuriel, Aisha, Seraphil, Ramil, and 8 others who had chosen names like Noor, Sami, Miriam, and Jonah. They wore simple linen robes the color of desert dusk, because the children on the As-Salam had insisted angels should look like grandmothers and grandfathers you could hug. Elias had stayed in orbit to finish debrief with the Terran Council, but he watched the live feed on the main screen while the fleet held station above Terra. 8 billion people were doing the same thing. Work stopped, traffic stopped, mosques, churches, temples, bars, and bedrooms all tuned to the same channel. The shuttle landed at dusk. Doors opened, 12 immortal beings stepped onto terrestrial soil for the first time since the Pleistocene. The wind carried the smell of hot sand and distant thunder. Adam took one step, then another, then simply stopped, head tilted back, eyes closed. Rain had not been forecast, but the desert does not always obey forecasts. A warm, sudden shower swept in from the Atlantic, fat drops hissing on sun-baked stone. Adam's knees buckled. He did not fall. Zuriel caught him, but Adam was already crying great, silent sobs that shook his whole frame. The others followed, one by one. Noor pressed both hands to the wet sand and brought them to her face like a child discovering mud. Sami opened his mouth and let the rain fall in, laughing and choking at once. Miriam stood in the open courtyard, arms out, spinning slowly while tears and rainwater mixed on her cheeks. On the feed audio, someone had left a microphone live. The only sounds were rain on stone, breathless laughter, and the raw, broken weeping of beings who had never felt whether that was not their own creation. Aisha, the 9-year-old violinist, had come down with them. She stood under the archway in a yellow raincoat 3 sizes too big, watching the gods fall apart. She walked forward, took Adam's trembling hand, and said, loud enough for the whole planet to hear, "It's okay. Rain is just the sky remembering it loves us." Adam looked down at her, water streaming from silver hair, and the sound he made was not human and not divine. It was something new. He knelt in the mud and let a child lead him inside. Later, when the rain eased to a whisper, the monastery's refectory filled with people. Local Bedouin families had arrived within minutes. Someone always knows when strangers land in the deep desert, bringing bread, dates, goat stew, and more chairs than actually existed. The former gods sat on the floor because every seat was taken by grandmothers who refused to yield them. Someone started a song, an old raiding song about lost camels and stubborn hearts, and within 30 seconds every human throat had joined. The gods listened, eyes wide, learning the words by the second verse. By the fourth, Jonah was singing harmony in a bass that made the stone walls vibrate. Elias watched from orbit, throat tight, as Ramil, once the voice that shattered galaxies, tried and failed to roll flatbread thin enough, earning gentle slaps on the wrist from a 90-year-old woman named Fatima who declared him hopeless but handsome. Seraphil, who had 6 wings and no clue how to use a teapot, poured scalding mint tea over his own hand and laughed at the pain because it was new. At midnight the power went out. The desert grid was never reliable, but no one moved for lights. They lit candles instead, hundreds of them. The courtyard became a galaxy of small flames. Adam stood in the center, barefoot in wet sand, and spoke for the first time since landing. "We thought," he said, voice hoarse from crying and singing, "that to be worshipped was the highest calling. Tonight we were worshipped by rain and fed by strangers and scolded for bad bread technique. We have never been so exalted." A cheer went up. Someone started drumming on an empty water tin. Children danced between candle flames. Zuriel sat cross-legged with little Aisha in his lap, letting her braid his newly brown hair while he learned the names of every cousin in the encampment. Off to the side, an old imam and a young rabbi argued amiably over whose scripture had better poetry while sharing a single glass of tea. Miriam listened, head tilted, taking mental notes. Elias finally couldn't stand it anymore. He took the next shuttle down, landed in the middle of the night, and walked into the courtyard in his rumpled uniform smelling of recycled ship air. The cheering when he appeared was deafening. Adam met him halfway, pulled him into a hug that smelled of rain and wood smoke and fresh bread, and whispered against his shoulder, "Your daughter was right. The sky does love you. How could it not?" Elias laughed until he couldn't breathe. Later, when the candles burned low and most people slept curled under shared blankets wherever they fell, Elias found Adam on the roof, watching the stars wheel overhead. "They look different from down here," Adam said quietly. "Smaller, brighter, closer." "That's because they're not yours anymore," Elias answered, sitting beside him. "They're ours, and we share." Adam was quiet for a long time. "We will make mistakes," he said finally. "We are very old children," Elias shrugged. "Join the club." Humanity has been screwing up since we discovered fire. The trick is to keep choosing to be kind the next morning. Adam leaned his head, silver hair now braided with desert flowers by a dozen small hands against Elias' shoulder. "Teach us," he asked, voice small. Elias put an arm around the being who had once held the universe in its fist. "Every day," he promised, "starting with breakfast. My mother-in-law is coming tomorrow. She makes nefe that will ruin you for eternity." Adam laughed, soft and wondering. From the courtyard below came the sound of someone tuning Aisha's violin. A moment later, the first notes of that same Lebanese love song drifted up, sleepy and perfect under a sky washed clean. Adam closed his eyes and let the music pour over him like baptism. Half a world away, in a small apartment in Beirut, Elias' wife and daughter woke to the same song playing from every speaker, every phone, every car radio on the planet. They ran to the balcony. The stars looked brighter than they had in years. His daughter waved both arms and shouted into the night, "Hi, Baba. Hi, Uncle Adam. The rain came here too." And the rain answered, soft and warm and laughing. Back in the desert, the violin played on, joined now by a drum, a flute, and 12 immortal voices learning how to carry a human melody without breaking it. The monastery bells, silent for 50 years, rang once, all by themselves, as though the stones themselves had decided it was time to celebrate. No one was surprised. Somewhere deeper than physics, the quiet voice listened to the music of children and former gods singing together under one small sky and was pleased. 10 years later, the first child born with wings laughed in a hospital in Nairobi, and the world held its breath to see what humanity would do next. Her name was Amal Noor Rahman Chen, daughter of a Kenyan midwife and a Chinese-Korean astrophysicist who had met during the Victory Week celebrations in the Sahara Monastery. She came into the world at 03:17 East Africa time, slippery and red and furious, and before the doctor could even clear her mouth, she opened her tiny fists and unfurled wings the color of dawn on snow. 6 of them. small, downy, perfect seraph wings that fluttered like a hummingbird's when she cried. The obstetrician, a woman who had delivered 3,000 babies and thought she had seen everything, dropped the clamp and whispered, "Subhanallah." The wings dried in minutes, turning from wet pink to shimmering white shot through with gold. When Amal laughed, her first real laugh at 4 days old, every light in the maternity ward brightened for a full second, as though the bulbs themselves were delighted. The video went viral before the placenta was even delivered. Within hours, the world divided into the same ancient camps, those who fell to their knees in awe, those who reached for weapons, and those who simply started knitting tiny sweaters with wing slits. Elias Rahman, now 52, beard fully silver, still wearing the same frayed uniform jacket because his daughter insisted it was lucky, stood outside the glass of the neonatal unit with Adam, who had kept the name and the silver hair, though he now answered to Baba Adam in 17 languages. They watched the baby stretch in her incubator, wings mantling like a sleepy eagle. "She's beautiful," Adam said, voice thick. "She's trouble," Elias answered, but he was smiling so wide his face hurt. Adam glanced at him sideways. "You are not afraid, terrified," Elias admitted, "but the good kind, the kind that comes with bedtime stories and college funds." Behind them, Zuriel, still answering to Aisha when children called, arrived carrying the violin that was now older than its player. The original Aisha, 19 now, walked beside him, tall and fierce and studying medicine in Cairo. She pressed her palm to the glass. "She has my chin," Aisha declared. "She has your stubborn," Elias corrected. Little Amal chose that moment to open her eyes, galaxy eyes, just like Zuriel's used to be, and looked straight at the gathered crowd of humans and former gods. She yawned, stretched one wing, and the heart rate monitor on the baby next to her flat-lined for half a second before jumping back stronger. The nurses stopped pretending they weren't crying. That night, every church bell, muezzin call, and temple gong on earth sounded at once, not coordinated, not planned, just happened. Dogs howled in harmony. Cats sat on rooftops and watched the sky with sudden solemnity. In the monastery courtyard, the olive tree that had burned without being consumed for a decade put out a single silver fruit no one had ever seen before. Adam picked it, bit it in half, and offered the other half to Elias. "Tastes like tomorrow," he said. Elias took a bite. "Tastes like hope with homework." They laughed until they couldn't breathe. The fear came, of course. Politicians screamed about abominations. Scientists demanded samples. Cults sprang up overnight claiming Amal was the returned Messiah, the Mahdi, the Maitreya, the final avatar. Someone tried to buy her wings on the dark web for 3 billion credits, but humanity, messy, stubborn, impossible humanity, did what it always does when faced with something new and terrifying. It loved her first. Within a week, pattern makers flooded the net with free wing sleeve templates. Grandmothers in Lagos and Hokkaido knitted tiny cardigans. Brazilian street artist painted a mural of Amal flying over Rio with the caption in Portuguese, "She belongs to all of us." When the first hate march formed in some cold northern city, 10,000 people showed up to counter-protest, half of them children carrying homemade signs that read, "We were all born with invisible wings and stop being mean, SHES baby." The march dissolved in confusion and cake. By the time Amal was 6 months old and trying to fly off the changing table, an incident that ended with her father catching her by one ankle while her mother laughed so hard she couldn't breathe, the world had settled on a new word. Post-human wasn't right. Transhuman was too cold. They called them dawn children, and they kept coming, not many, 1 in 40,000 births, but enough. Wings of fire, eyes of starlight, sometimes skin that shimmered like oil on water. Some could hear prayers the way other children heard music. One boy in Reykjavik spoke only in perfect haiku until he was 5, then switched to Icelandic rap and no one could explain it. The former gods, now simply elders, moved quietly among them, teaching, learning, changing diapers with the same hands that once shaped galaxies. Adam became the world's most patient kindergarten teacher. Zuriel opened a music school in the Sahara, where dawn children learned to control light the way other kids learned to tie shoes. Miriam ran a crisis hotline for parents whose toddlers accidentally set the curtains on fire with joy. Elias, retired from command but never from fatherhood, spent his days chasing his granddaughter around the monastery gardens, while she tried to fly to the roof and steal dates. One evening when Amal was 3 and convinced the moon was a ball she could catch, Elias sat with Adam on the same wall they had shared the night the gods came home. The sky was full of children now, some with wings, some without, flying kites made of light that sang when the wind touched them. "Look at them," Adam said softly. "We thought we were giving you the universe. You gave us a childhood." Elias watched Amal execute a wobbly barrel roll and land in a date palm, giggling. "We just made room at the table," he said. "You brought the good china." Adam was quiet for a long time. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked finally. "Opening the door, letting us in?" Elias thought about it, really thought. He remembered the day the outer dark came, remembered the violin, remembered rain on immortal faces. He looked at the silver fruit still growing on the olive tree, now heavy with a decade of tomorrows. No, he said. I regret a lot of things, not that. Amal chose that moment to launch herself off the palm, wings flaring gold, shrieking with delight as she flew straight into Elias' arms. He caught her, spinning her until she squealed. Baba Eli, she laughed, smearing his face with sticky date fingers. Uncle Moon is hiding again. Then we'll just have to find him tomorrow, he said, kissing her forehead. Adam watched them, eyes soft wonder on a face that had once been terror and glory. From the courtyard below, Zuriel began to play, the same Lebanese love song, older now, deeper, threaded through with new notes no human throat had ever made. One by one, winged and wingless children drifted down to listen, the music older than stars and younger than hope. Elias held his granddaughter close, felt her tiny heart beating against his, felt the faint warmth of wings that were not his but were family all the same. And somewhere in the quiet space between one note and the next, the great voice that had never actually left whispered a single word that carried across every world humanity had ever touched. This is what I meant all along. The song rose, and the children sang with it, and the night held them gently, the way night is supposed to hold children. No one was afraid anymore. Not of wings, not of tomorrow, not even of each other. On the 1000th anniversary of the day humanity refused to kneel, the last fear in the universe died quietly in the arms of a child. They called the celebration the Day of the Open Table. There was no single place it happened. It happened everywhere at once, on Terra, on Luna, on the ring cities of Proxima, on the water worlds of Kepler 442, on the great migration ship still crawling toward Andromeda. Every settlement, every habitat, every wandering ark lit a fire or a lamp or a star and set an extra place, because that was the only rule left. Whoever you are, wherever you are, set an extra place. On old Earth, in the Sahara monastery that had never been abandoned again, the courtyard had grown into a city of stone and light. The original olive tree, still burning softly, still never consumed, stood at the center, roots drinking from a spring that had appeared the week the gods arrived and never stopped flowing. Its branches now stretched a full kilometer, heavy with silver fruit that tasted like whatever memory you missed most. Amal Nur Rahman Chen, now 1,000 years old in the way only dawn children age, stood beneath it, barefoot, wings of living dawnfire folded loose around her shoulders like a cloak. She was telling a story to a circle of children whose species had not even existed when her grandfather Elias first said no to the host. They listened the way children always listen when someone is speaking truth wrapped in wonder. And then, Amal said, voice warm with millennia of laughter, my great-great times 1,000 grandfather looked at the ones who made the stars and said, you want worship, earn it. The children, some winged, some scaled, some made of light, some still stubbornly human, gasped in perfect unison. An old man limped into the circle, leaning on a cane carved from the first shuttle ramp the gods had walked. His beard was white as moon dust, his eyes still black and fierce and kind. The children made room without being asked. Elias Rahman, 1,042 years old, kept alive by stubbornness, love, and a little discreet help from former gods who refused to let him die before the story was finished, sat on the stone bench that had replaced the crate he once stood on to declare new rules. He was frail now, but when he smiled the courtyard brightened as if someone had turned up the sun. Tell them the rest, he said to Amal, voice papery but steady. Amal's wings flared gently, scattering motes of gold that became fireflies. So the gods tried to scare us, she continued. They showed us a darkness older than light, and do you know what we did? A tiny girl with nebulous skin and no mouth raised her hand anyway. You sang. We sang, Amal agreed. 8,000 voices on 3 little ships, plus one very brave violin, and the darkness ran away to hide because it had never been sung to before. Elias chuckled. Actually, it's still hiding. Every time a child laughs too loud, it flinches. The children giggled, and somewhere far beyond the edge of everything, the last shadow of the outer dark shivered and shrank a little more. Night fell gentle and slow. Across the worlds, the extra places were filled, some by neighbors, some by strangers, some by beings who had once been called gods and now answered to uncle, auntie, teacher, friend. Adam's silver hair, now braided with flowers from 100 worlds, walked the courtyard carrying a tray of tea so old it had become legend. He paused beside Elias. Still no throne, he teased. Elias patted the bench. This is better. Adam sat. They watched the children chase fireflies that were actually fragments of Amal's wings having fun. Do you remember, Adam asked quietly, when we thought power was the ability to make galaxies kneel? Elias snorted. I remember when you couldn't roll bread thin enough to see daylight through. Adam laughed the laugh of someone who had learned joy the hard way and intended to keep it. High above, the sky ignited. Not with fireworks, those were for lesser celebrations, but with wings, millions of them. Dawn children, starborn, the winged descendants of every species that had ever joined the table. They flew in perfect silence, forming a single living constellation, an olive tree whose branches touched every world humanity had ever loved. At its heart flew little Amal, the original, the first, now ancient and forever young, violin and 1,000 years old tucked under her chin. She played the Lebanese love song. Every throat in the universe, human, divine, machine, animal, vegetable, and things that had never needed names joined in, not because they were commanded. Because they remembered the words, the song rose until physics forgot how to be serious. Gravity loosened its grip for one heartbeat. Children floated an inch off the ground. Old men felt their spines straighten. The olive tree's silver fruit ripened all at once and fell upward, becoming new stars that spelled, in every language ever spoken, "We are not afraid." And in that moment, the last fear, the final, trembling fragment of the outer dark that had hidden in the cracks between galaxies for 1,000 years, heard the song, felt the light of 1,000,000,000,000 small kindnesses, and simply let go. It did not die screaming. It died quietly in the arms of a child who had never learned mercy from former gods and stubborn humans alike. The child, a boy with skin like midnight and wings like sunrise, carried the fading shadow to the burning olive tree and laid it at the roots. The tree drank it in, gentle as forgiveness, and the flame at its heart burned a little brighter, a little softer. Elias felt it go. Everyone did. 1,000 years of breath humanity had not realized it was holding left lungs in one long, wondering sigh. Adam's hand found Elias's. Their fingers, one ancient and trembling, one immortal and steady, laced together. "It's gone," Adam whispered. "Yeah," Elias said, voice cracking. "Took long enough." Amal, the violinist, landed softly in front of them, wings folding, eyes shining with tears that became tiny stars and drifted away. She knelt, pressed her forehead to Elias' knee the way children had done for 1,000 years. "Thank you, Baba Eli," she said, "for teaching us how to be brave." Elias touched her hair, silver now with age instead of starlight. "Thank you for teaching us how to fly." Above them, the living constellation shifted, becoming a new shape, a table, vast, endless, every seat filled, room for more, and in the center, one empty place, waiting, always waiting. Because that was the final rule, the only one that mattered, there must always be room. Elias closed his eyes. He felt the quiet voice, the one that had never left, only waited, brush his mind one last time. "Well done, good and faithful servant. The table is set. Come eat." He smiled, tired and complete. In the morning, they would find his body on the bench, hands still in Adam's, face peaceful, the faintest smile, as if he had just heard the punchline to a joke the universe had been telling for 13 billion years. They buried him beneath the olive tree that never stopped burning, next to the violin that finally rested. And the children, winged and wingless, human and not, mortal and eternal, danced on his grave, because that is what you do when someone teaches you that even death can be gentle if you refuse to kneel to it. The song never ended. It only grew. Across every world, every extra place was filled, and still there was room, because humanity had looked at the infinite and said, "Come sit, there's always more bread." And the universe, vast and ancient and newborn every morning, finally learned how to say thank you, in the language of open doors, in the dialect of second chances, in the mother tongue of children who laugh at gravity and elders who remember how to play, forever.